Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of RTM's Track Talk with your host Ailsa Cowen. Today I am joined by David Ollerhead, Programme Director at Network Rail's Open for Business programme. So hello David, thank you for joining me today on RTM's Track Talks podcast.
Thanks, Ailsa, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat today.
So just to get things started, could you give me and our listeners a brief roundup of your career so far?
So I've actually worked for Network Rail now for nearly 9 years, but prior to that, I've had quite a varied career, starting my career as an engineer with Western Helicopters, having studied engineering at Durham University, and moved from that to work for Aviva, the insurance company, as an investment analyst, and then for a commercial manager for a services company in the City of London, before I took a year out to do an MBA at Henley Management College. So quite a varied start to my career. And I then really started to work on sort of process improvement, which is what I've really spent the last sort of almost 20 years working on, transformation, process improvement. Initially for a small independent company, and working into many organizations, including London Underground, which is where I got my first insights into the railway industry and some of the sort of challenges and opportunities that presents. My last role before joining Network Rail was to head up the in-house consultancy for Airwave. So some of your listeners may know that the emergency services communication system that British Transport Police use is the Airwave system, although it's moving on for that now. But I spent a good few years with them before finishing up by, funnily enough, running a transformation program for them, which was the last role I did before I joined Network Rail. The first thing I did for Network Rail was to lead the post-implementation review of the first devolution of Network Rail into the route-based structure. So that was a great insight to go around each of the routes and understand some of the challenges. 8 years ago when we first moved from a sort of centralized to a more route-based structure, and has really helped me understand as well how we work as an organization now and moving to a much more devolved organization as we go through our Putting Passengers First program as well. After this, I led the business change practice, which is an internal team that supports all the major change and transformation programs. Actually supporting teams and individuals into their building internal change capability before taking on my current role as program director for the Open for Business program.
So working in the rail industry wasn't something that you always, say, imagined you would do. It's just how the route has taken you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, and it's quite interesting because I almost feel like I've come round full circle in a sense, because I started off in engineering, trained as an engineer, Western Helicopters, very engineering project based organisation, just like Network Rail, and so I've gone through various things which have really, I felt, broadened my experience, but it almost feels like slightly like coming home to an engineering organisation like Network Rail. But it's not something I was playing, although I did play with train tracks when I was younger because I was an engineer. So of course I did. I did not so much train tracks, but sort of Lego and Meccano and building trains and everything like that, because that's in my DNA. But so I feel very comfortable in this environment, and I love the passion, the people, and the pride that people take in the railway.
So going back to your role you just referred to that you have now as Programme Director at Network Rail's Open for Business programme, Network Rail commissioned the Hansford Review a while ago to look at how you can make yourselves more approachable for businesses to work with. What did this review specifically find then, and how have you gone on to action your findings?
Yeah, so we commissioned Professor Peter Hansford, who was the former UK government chief construction advisor, really to investigate how we could make it easier for other organisations to invest in and build on the railway, or, as you say, make us more approachable for businesses to work with.
Yeah.
The overall theme of Hansford was about what he called unlocking rail investment. So I take two key parts of that. I mean, there's a lot of detail in this. It's a fairly comprehensive report. But for me, the two things about unlocking rail investment are the two sort of sides of the coin. So firstly, about encouraging more investment into the railway, so unlocking funding, but also getting value for money from that investment into the railway. The other thing that Hansford talked a lot about, and a key point he made, was the importance of removing barriers for third parties, and those, particularly those outside the railway industry, to make it easier to engage with us. We immediately accepted all of the recommendations and committed to deliver 22 main actions to implement the findings, which were in the public domain as well. So I was brought in to mobilise the programme, which is now called Open for Business, to deliver those. I mean, to give you an idea about some of the things, I say 22 commitments, there was a fair amount of detail in there, some key things that has changed since we started the programme. We published a list of investment opportunities for third parties, so regionally led, to sort of encourage that visibility and transparency. We've put in place business development teams, now regionally based, to interface with sort of local funders, and also a dedicated project finance team. We've done a lot of work around our standards, and I think there's a theme we'll probably come on to later as well, but looked at review and amending our standards and practices, aligning those and trying to simplify how they are written and reviewed, and critically establishing a sort of standards challenge process so other organisations can come in and suggest better ways of maintaining and enhancing the railway, which is a mindset change as well as a process change. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. And I think the other area as well, which we looked at, was establishing a new framework for our asset protection and optimization teams, new service level commitments, new leadership, including professional head. So a lot of work in there, because they quite often are the sort of first or the day-to-day contact with our third party. So it's really important that they are sort of customer focused and responsive and supportive for that need to get that investment in the railway.
So for anyone who doesn't know, could you tell me what is essentially the Open for Business programme and what your role basically entails following the review?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point in a sense, saying following the review, because Hansford kicked all of this off. Open for Business, we deliberately sort of called it Open for Business rather than the response to Hansford review, because I think it's important that we, I use the term the Ronseal test. We've got to do what it says on the tin, type of thing. So what are we talking about here? It is about trying to make Network Rail more open for business. It's all about being easy to engage with and work with, becoming an efficient and dependable partner by reducing costs, improving value for money, attracting that third-party investment that I talked about, and also improving and streamlining our processes. So it's quite a broad remit, but actually we've been able to sort of target it down and build on those enabling commitments, because what we've now done, having delivered those 22 commitments successfully, we want to build on those. And I think about it as that's like the foundations of the house. So we've got the foundations of the house, which you really need if you're building a house. But actually, what you need are the walls and the roofs and the plumbing and everything like that to make it safe and dry and homely. So that's what we're doing now. We're building the walls and the roof to sort of take it to the next level, to give the full set of benefits to sort of passengers, but also really increasing our ambition. So what we want to do is drive improved value for money in our sort of capital delivery to deliver benefits to passengers. It's really important, and this easier to engage with Open for Business part is a lot about reputation as well. So it's listening to our customers and suppliers, working hard with our customers and suppliers to understand what their pinch points and their challenges are. And I think with the move in Network Rail towards more regionalisation and devolvement, it's actually supporting those regions, because they are now the power base for us as a railway, where our resources and effort is focused. So supporting them to establish themselves as valued local partners. So we have 4 key work streams in the second phase of work. Firstly, bringing investment into the railway, that third-party investment. Secondly, value for money engineering, and I'll sort of come on to that as well. That builds on the standards piece that I talked about. Thirdly, increasing contestability, and that's something that Hansford did talk a lot about in his review, but underpins a lot of this, and I'll sort of come on to what contestability means as well, and taking further the reforms around asset protection and optimization. So If you've got time, shall I go through each of those in turn and just sort of talk through those?
Yeah, if you want to give us a brief overview of each one, go ahead. Yes, please.
Fantastic. Okay, so the first area is around bringing investment into the railway, and that's all about enabling those regional business development teams to deliver a sort of step change in third party investment to support both national but more particularly local priorities. And well, why would we want to do that? Well, I think a lot of it is about sort of leveraging the regional devolution to increase the third party investment in the railways, as I talked about. So that's a huge and great vehicle to do that. And we want to sort of continue to support that as well. And actually, and it's interesting now with COVID and a lot of the emphasis on sort of regional investment and what have you, this we believe will be a great way of facilitating sort of regional jobs, housing growth, and sort of wider government ambitions and so on, and also carbon reduction, rural connectivity, and all that sort of stuff. So that all sounds great, but how are we going to do it? So three key things we will do. Now we have the business development teams in place. It's how can we actually support them in developing what they do. So developing competency and capability, and growing our own talent, particularly because I think, we talked about how long I've been in the railway. It is quite a complex industry. So having people who both understand the industry and the railway and Network Rail particularly, but also have that commercial focus is quite difficult. You don't find those off the shelf. So how can we build those? It's really important to do that. A real marker for us as well is increasing transparency. So we have a guide called the Investing in the Network Guide. One of the challenges for that, and for me as well, is that it's quite sort of legalistic. It's quite jargonistic as well. So how can we actually make sure that it is easier to read, easier to understand, still being very comprehensive and still being correct, etc., but making sure that particularly non-technical people are able to read it and understand it and get value from it. And the third key area in this work stream is about developing a sort of a way of making sure that we improve stakeholder engagement with a customer relationship management system, so that we can make sure that we are effective when we're engaging with all our key regional stakeholders. The second area is what we've called value for money engineering. And this is really building upon the external standards challenge that we launched in the first tranche of work. We've, proud to say we've received 122 challenges to date. But it's all about building on that and asking ourselves and challenging ourselves, our ways of work and our standards and our current practices as well. So we've done already a level of prioritization about where we think where we know the highest spend areas are. We've been going out and engaging with the frontline staff to understand where they think the highest areas of opportunity to increase value for money are. And then what we're going to drive through those areas where the biggest areas of opportunity are to sort of increase the value for money, and really try and make sure that is spread across each of the regions, so that we can sort of spread the savings and increase that value for money, which is obviously a critical driver for us as an organisation. Third area is around contestability. Contestability is, it's a technical word, but essentially what it's all about is about putting work out to market. What we mean by it is it's about putting work out to market at a very much earlier stage than we would traditionally. Focus on the outcomes of what it's trying to deliver, and making sure that it's there and focused on value for money and removing barriers, and so hopefully would benefit from engaging with other people on this. So it's rather than being really prescriptive about what we want, it's being really clear about what we're trying to achieve, and then working with partners to come up with the best solution to that, and being open to sort of different ways of working. Because we believe, and Hansford was really clear about this as well, that is much more likely to increase innovation and creativity. And if we can do that, then that'll get that value for money piece that I talked about before. So we've been doing some pilots with contestability, some small scale contestability pilots in some of our routes and regions, which have come up with some fantastic early results by applying these principles. We've been building capability, understanding what contestability means, and particularly thinking about for our regional teams how they need to engage with potential suppliers differently. And then we're looking to actually to build some larger on network type pilots, depending on what the regions want to do, because a lot of the principles that we apply on the smaller scale pilots will be applicable in the larger schemes as well. And I think the other, and there's a strong link to the standards piece with this as well, is that a lot of the standards particularly were seen as barriers to entry and barriers to contestability as well. So we've identified around 40 standards that were seen as a barrier to contestability, where contractors or projects have raised that and looking to sort of see how we can address them so that encourages rather than sort of prevents contestability. And again, that's another barrier that, as Hansford talked about, we're trying to reduce. Final area. Sorry, I've gone on about this. You understand my passion about this. I do get quite excited about all this stuff, but it's around the asset protection teams, asset protection optimization. We did a lot of work in the first phase around sort of building up the sort of structure and trying to get that to increase the professionalism of the ASPRO teams by giving them the support that they need and looking at competency and capability. And we continue to support the ASPRO teams because, as I say, they're often the main point of contact with a lot of our third parties. So we're trying to achieve excellence in ASPRO service through sort of professional customer-focused ASPRO, but also provide value for money and make sure that our customers see us as easy to work with. So we are rolling out a new competency framework similar to business development. We've also massively increased the customer feedback that we get from our customers on this, because it's really important for us to understand not only how we are doing, but what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well, so that we can actually action it. And focusing our teams on sort of customer excellence training so that we become more agile and more responsive. So those are the four key areas, and hopefully that sort of gives you a bit of a flavour of, at a very high level, because there's a lot more detail beyond this about what we are currently focused on.
No, it's great to hear about everything that you're currently focused on and how you're taking things forward. But just taking things back to the third parties you were talking about,
Yes.
a lot of our listeners and readers here at RTM are SMEs. So could you tell me what opportunities Network Rail have at the moment for SMEs, or for any SME employee or leader who may be listening and thinking, this sounds really exciting, I'd like to get involved in this?
Well, if it does sound exciting and you want to get involved, fantastic. I'd really encourage you to do so. I mean, to give you an idea, in the last financial year, Network Rail worked with over 3,000 SMEs. And we're really keen to sort of continue to engage. So there's a lot of stuff that, it's outside my program, but just it's probably worthwhile highlighting to your listeners that we're doing. So we now have a sort of procurement pipeline on our website, and that's updated every 4 weeks. Go and have a look at that, and then they can sort of see the opportunities that are there. We do have a robust SME policy about encouraging SMEs. We've also, and I think it's really important in the current situation, there's also, and you'll see it on the website, there's a dedicated email address which has been set up for our supply chain in relation to COVID-19. So again, go and have a look at that. So for existing, both if you're struggling with COVID-19 or some of the constraints on that, go and look at that. There's a help email address to sort of go on to do that as well. I think there's a couple of other things I'd like to highlight as well. Something I'm sort of very, very keen on as well. We have these things called the Research and Development Challenge Statements, and your one of your previous podcasts, David Rowe, might have mentioned these as well. But they basically they are. I think there's 55 in total, and they each detail a specific business obstacle. And the aim of that is to really raise industry awareness of our priority challenges and promote our research and development into new ideas and technologies to solve them. And clearly also, that means that if you are an SME, you have a product or a service, you're not quite sure about what it is or what problem it could solve, go and have a look at the R&D challenge statements, because we're really eager to work with the supply chain and SMEs to assist in the development of ideas and products and challenges against them. So that's another area where, I say, it was specifically set up and where we are really working with a lot of SMEs around this, and particularly exciting in the innovation area as well. And I think the other thing two other things to mention, which is more my space really, which is around there's a new process. We put in a new process to speed up product acceptance. I think clearly before we can put new products, innovative products on the railway, they have to be tested and approved. And obviously we do need to keep passengers and staff safe. But I think historically it's been seen one of these other barriers as a long and complex process and a blocker to innovation. So we've overhauled the process, we've tackled the backlog, and by June 2019, over the 85% of the applications were approved in under 40 days, whereas before that it was about 54%. So it's a major improvement, and 40 days. If you think about the acceptance process that we'd need to do to go make sure that we can get products on the railway, I actually think 40 days is pretty good. We now have a work bank of less than 100 applications versus 500 before, and the team are issuing over 600 certificates a year. So I think a major step forward. And I think the other bit, coming back to standards, which again is one of the underlying themes around here, is that we've made it much more easy to access Network Rail standards. So there's now a web portal whereby people can actually go onto the website and have a look at and access the standards portal, and it builds upon our commitment really to try and drive innovation by encouraging suppliers to submit challenges to standards. So clearly, if you can't access the standards, it's very difficult for you to submit challenges. So actually making that more accessible and easier to access should fit with our commitment to be more efficient and dependable and open.
So Network Rail have a business development directors embedded in each region. I know you've already briefly touched on these, but why did you see this as necessary, and have they appeared to be beneficial?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. It's pretty fundamental, actually. It was part of our overall strategy, first of all, to devolve to a regional level and get closer to our local stakeholders. And in this case, I mean, local funders such as regional transport bodies, local enterprise partnerships, and local authorities. But also the overall driver of the Open for Business driver, it's about making sure that we are both able to access and support those bodies in making investments into the railway. So by having those teams now, it means that we can be much more responsive to local requirements. Critically, the teams, and you're asking what they're doing, a lot of it is around supporting and working with those third-party funders in getting investments into the railway. So, for example, for helping to build business cases, working through the investment processes, understanding the railway-specific challenges that those third parties may not be aware of. But I think also the devolution point is the recognition that everything we do can or should be driven at a much more local level rather than a sort of top-down central approach. And in terms of, has it been beneficial? Absolutely. We committed to in our strategic business plan in CP6 to increase third-party funding in CP6, our current 5-year control period, to 1.6 billion from 1 billion in CP5. So it's a 60% increase. We're tracking this closely, and actually we're targeting even more now that we have those regional teams in place, because there's a massive multiplier effect of increasing local connectivity for local economies and businesses by investment in the railway network. And it also, particularly now with the current government agenda as we come out of COVID of build, 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 and also the wider agenda of levelling up outside London and South East, enhancing local connectivity, these teams will be absolutely critical to making sure that the right investments are being made and that we're working closely with those local bodies to make sure that we are investing on the right things on the railway and helping that to happen and helping people through that process.
So the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps announced last week his newly formed acceleration unit. How important are moves like this to speed up and safeguard rail projects in your eyes?
Well, I think these types of initiatives are really important. And I think it shows how serious government is in investing and enhancing our major national infrastructure, the rail infrastructure. I think it's a sort of statement of confidence in one side. Again, it's one of these two-sided coins. I think it's a statement of confidence, but I think it's also rightly a challenge to our established ways of doing things that I welcome. And hopefully you'll have heard I've sort of I've used the word challenge quite a lot in this session, because I think challenging the status quo is really important. It's very easy to get sort of sucked into, well, this is the way we've always done it, so we really need to sort of start thinking slightly out of the box for that. I think Open for Business is not technically part of this initiative, but much of the work that we are doing, such as our goals about cutting barriers, challenging standards, increasing efficiency where safe to do so, encouraging innovation through contestability, and so on, would really support this and link to this and help us move in the right direction on this. And I think as a related point, some of our contestability pilots are showing some fantastic promise from the early results. And if we are going to sort of follow some of the principles that's bringing out, particularly in the sort of so-called high street environment away from the railway, then if we can do more with the same amount of money, it's a really important way of us safeguarding those rail projects. And that's a lot of feedback, for instance, we've had from some of the disability groups when we were looking at the access for all footbridges, where they've said, well, we'd rather you did more rather than have fewer access for all footbridges, to paraphrase a fairly long discussion on that. And I think the other thing is many of our other existing initiatives, we have an efficiency portfolio, we have a capital delivery centre of excellence, we have our putting passengers first transformation as well, devolving resources and services to our regions, enables us to put those resources much closer to where the action is, which will help further speed up and safeguard those rail projects. And we closely link to and underpin a lot of the activities from our programme as well.
So where do you see the rail industry in 10 years' time? And I appreciate this is quite a big question. We do like to ask all of our guests this question, and everyone always goes, wow, okay.
Well, it is a bit of a wow, okay moment for this as well. And I think particularly where we are at present, of coming out of COVID and some of the other issues that are going at the moment. But I think one of the key things I really sincerely hope is that so-called track and train, will be much closer together in 10 years time. I worked on a program a number of years, industry access program, which was looking at how we could efficiently gain access to the railway for our renewals and enhancements work, and it became quickly apparent that we've got different motivations from the Network Rail as the infrastructure owner to the train operators, and rightly so, but that becomes particularly challenging. So the more that we can get that integrated will, in my view, be so the railway really works as an integrated single system rather than various bits that are sort of tacked together. I think it'll massively benefit our passengers and freight users, and also will make it much easier to provide a more efficient and value for money service. I think one thing that I'm particularly passionate about as well is around sustainability and in the environment. And I think I do see the rail industry as a major contributor towards that, helping reduce the nation's carbon emissions through increasing electrification, taking trucks off the road. There's a fantastic case study that I've had a chance to talk to you about it as well, about work we've done with Felixstowe Port about enhancing the rail infrastructure there, where they're funding a second track to get their containers directly onto the rail network rather than using trucks. I think that's a fantastic thing that we can do as a wider and longer term contribution towards sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. My Open for Business reforms, and there's a little way, so our Open for Business reforms make it easier to work with, closer to our regional customers and suppliers. Absolutely, I think that's what we've got to be. It's got to be locally responsive. But ultimately, I think we should be confident that there is a long-term future for the railway. It will still be a valuable, safe-to-use, core national asset. And regardless of any changes to working practices brought on by increased home working that we've seen over the last few months, I think there is a great future for the railway, and I look forward to being part of it.
So finally, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing the industry right now?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and clearly at this time I can't go forward without sort of mentioning the recent tragedy at Stonehaven, which is really front and central to our challenges right now as an industry, because we're all really shocked and deeply saddened at what has happened. It's personally affected a lot of us and colleagues, and we're all still coming to terms with it. Certainly since I've been in the rail industry, I've seen nothing like this as well. So I don't really think it's appropriate for me to go into any details. As there's active investigations going on at the moment. There are 2 independent task forces to help us better manage the cuttings and embankments, and as well as responding to severe weather events. But clearly that's really important. Safety, we're blessed and have been blessed with a really safe record in the rail industry in the United Kingdom and Great Britain. So it's really important that we keep our focus on that, and we do that. So I think it's right for me to mention that, but I don't think it's particularly my place to sort of go into any detail on that. I think the other big obvious challenge at the moment is that we as a country really are facing the implications of the COVID challenges. And for the railway, the obvious thing on the railway is around, on one side, a massive drop in demand for our services as people adjust to the sort of the new normal of working from home, but equally needing to sort of keep the services continuing for our sort of our key workers, and as people start to return to work, making sure that that's been done in a sort of safe way, but also to allay people's fears about travelling on public transport. And I think, sort of stepping back from the day-to-day operational impact of that, clearly this means a massive reduction in income for the whole railway system in the short term, which does place some sort of question marks on the funding model in the short term. And, obviously I haven't got a crystal ball, but would a lot of the appetite for people to return to work will depend upon what the whole funding model works for the railway system. So I think we've got to work our way through that. And basically, it comes down to, as a lot of your listeners will know, it's the delicate balance between demand, capacity, and performance, whilst maintaining effective safety measures for both passengers and rail workers. Because that's the ongoing challenge. How do we balance that up as we all move towards the new normal for working, whatever that new normal is. So I think that's where I'd focus on. How do we manage that, and what does this mean for us in the longer term, and what is the new normal for that?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. It's been fantastic to talk to you today, and it's great to hear from someone who's so excited about the railway and all the different innovative projects that are going on right now.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time and for the opportunity. Hopefully you heard the passion for what we're trying to do come through here. I really believe that that the program can make a difference, but I also fundamentally believe in the railway as a core part and what we do as a country, and underpinning that and getting that right so that it's safe and it meets our passenger requirements is absolutely critical. So if I can play a little part in that, I'll be very happy.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of RTM's Track Talk. If you enjoyed, stay tuned for our next episode coming very soon.